Do you have it in front of you, or can I walk us through that 2020 offseason in general? Because it's even worse than
so even
than
the
just
okay. So let's go through
them for the draft.
Let's go through the offseason too.
So you mentioned Saddiq Bey. The trade that got them the rights to Saddiq Bey, or I think it may have been a draft night deal.
Yeah.
Luke Kennard, Bruce Brown, and they gave up a second-round pick to get Saddiq Bey and Rodney Magruder. That's something I think you can hammer them for in the moment. Like, that is, unless you just think Saddiq Bey is going to be like an all-star potential guy, which I don't think was really the read on him at the time even, that's crazy. You're trading Luke Kennard, who you had already paid significant money to, Bruce Brown, who was better than people remember and started games for a playoff team in Detroit before he moved to Brooklyn, to get Bey and Rodney Magruder, who really didn't do much in the NBA beyond that. They traded away Christian Wood along with a first and second round pick to Houston to get Isaiah Stewart.
Yep.
So that's another giving up stuff. So like the picks are one thing, but they're giving assets away in order to take these players. They made a good trade, I think, which was to send Trevor Ariza out for DeLon Wright. But then they got rid of Wright the next summer, and that became Corey Joseph and 2 second-round picks. Terrible.
Yeah.
And then that same offseason was when, I'm sure all NBA fans remember, Chris, they gave Mason Plumlee 3 years and $24 million. They gave a guaranteed contract to Jahlil Okafor, and they gave Jeremy Grant 3 years and $60 million, which they then traded to Portland, for the pick that became Jalen Duren. But even with that in context, they also, in that Duren move, if you remember, it was that whole 3-team swap with the Knicks and I believe the Thunder, where or the Hornets maybe 4-team, where they had to take on like $10 million of dead salary of Kemba Walker's. So that's exactly where I homed in when I was thinking about what went wrong here, is that 2020 offseason. I don't know what their direction was supposed to be there, Chris. I don't know what the goal necessarily was. They're simultaneously stacking up new rookies and vets, and it didn't exactly make sense even from a sort of lineup standpoint, how all those guys would ever play together in a current or future part of that team. It basically just felt like a new GM came in and said, I got to do stuff. Here's the stuff. Are you happy, Mr. Gores? Like, that's what it felt like to me, even in the moment and especially in hindsight.
Yeah, and I think when you kind of just see how everything has gone since then, nothing has really even added to what they were doing. I mean, they decided not to keep Saddiq Bey, which, like, fine, I get that. I don't know if I'd want to be the team paying Saddiq Bey's next contract, considering the amount of money. He reportedly wants the stuff about his role that we've reportedly seen him kind of agitating for behind the scenes. But, like, everything is added up here, and I think there's also player development questions in all of this, too. You know, John Boehlein's working behind the scenes there. He, by all accounts, is, like, good and likes working with young guys, but you're not getting a lot of results out of that. You had Dwayne Casey there before this, and, like, what was Dwayne Casey, like, what did he ultimately add to that team? Like, it's like a real question to me. It's like, what was he getting out of those young guys for you? Then you bring in Monty Williams, and you would know this better than me. I don't know if that's, like, if Monty's exact strong suit is player development. Like, that doesn't exactly feel.
I think it is to a degree, but
to the degree,
I also think he's a pretty stubborn guy. Yeah,
and this situation. I think if you look back to 2020 and then you look at 2021, you look at 2022, and you look at now, stubbornness. This needs to be flexible. This needs to be creative. This needs to be about cultivating, like, long-term value out of even just something out of what you have already made mistakes on, perhaps, right? Like, I think that's kind of where you're at with this. It's figuring out what can you actually get out of the mistakes you made the last couple of years, and if not, write it off. But they've kind of, like, the way I read the hire of Monty Williams is sort of doubling down on the decisions they've made that didn't really make any sense. Like, that's what I think kind of confounds me ultimately about this. If you start making mistakes in 2020, there's a feeling now. And then the Monty Williams thing is the kind of coaching hire you make to elevate your organization to the next level. But, like, they're like something just like there's something off pretty clearly about how the timing of trying to do that when that maybe wasn't the right way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that was an ownership hire over the head of a GM who has failed, right?
Who has very bad taste in bigs for some reason. Who loves just accumulating centers for some reason, which also doesn't make sense.
And made that entire set of mistakes in 2020 on top of that, right? And like hasn't drafted well and everything, like just failed. So I think that's a pretty big issue to me. Is it is just such a symptom, or at least like an indicator to me of a broken franchise where the owner wants to make a splash or right the ship in some way, but doesn't necessarily have the recognition or the care to actually fully overhaul things. Maybe doesn't want to go through the process of hiring somebody else at the executive spot, doesn't want to pay the salary of the guy that they fire or spend what it takes to hire somebody new on top of that. Whatever the case may be, you bring the head coach in, but obviously he wasn't the hire of that GM, so that probably just compounds the mistakes that are being made and adds to a level of miscommunication and disorganization. And that is a perfectly understandable pathway to something like the Jaden Ivey saga.
Yeah.
Or, Asar Thompson, where it's like he's getting highlight reel plays every night, but is he somebody who necessarily like should have been playing? I know there were injuries. It's all like you said, just sort of added up together. I guess they will get Monte Morris back at some point. I think he will be a big part of this team. They clearly wanted another veteran ball handler. So Bogdanovich is finally back. Duren is still out. Morris is still yet to play. Maybe when they're fully healthy, it'll look a little bit more coherent, but it's pretty broken.